The records of the Croft Plantation in St. Helena Parish, South Carolina, are, for the most part, unremarkable. They speak of cotton yields and tidal patterns, of supplies ordered from Charleston, and the slow, brutal arithmetic of human property. The ledger for the year 1847 is bound in cracked leather, its pages filled with the precise, spidery script of the owner, Elias Croft. In these pages, men and women are reduced to numbers, their lives tracked by their capacity for labor. On a page, dated for the month of October, there is an entry that differs from the others not in its content, but in what it omits. The entry, recorded on the 14th day of the month, is brief. It reads, "One male, field hand, age approx. 30, expired, wasting sickness." Below this, in the column for accounting adjustments, another line is added, "Total loss, buried same day." There is no name listed next to the entry. The space is simply left blank, an empty line between a man named Jupiter and a woman named Sarah. The cause of death, wasting sickness, was a common term of the era, a vague diagnosis for any ailment that resulted in a slow, inexplicable decline. But the plantation overseer's work log from that same week suggests the decline was anything but slow. The overseer, a man named Silas Croft, a distant cousin to the owner, kept a separate journal for his own records. His entries were practical, concerned only with the plantation's productivity. On October 13th, his log notes, "Full hands in the north field, weather holding." There is no mention of illness or diminished capacity. His entry for the 14th is stark. "One hand down. Male, recent purchase. Fell in the field before dusk yesterday. Carried to his quarters, dead by morning. Master Croft ordered a quick burial." This contradicts the notion of a lingering illness. A man working at full capacity one day does not simply waste away by the next. The overseer's log provides no further explanation. It simply moves on to calculations of the day's harvest, noting the loss of a single worker would put them behind schedule. A more personal account of this period is found in the correspondence of Elias Croft's wife, Eleanor. In a letter to her sister in Charleston, dated October 16th, she makes no mention of a death. Instead, she writes of an atmosphere, a change in the character of the plantation. "A most peculiar quiet has fallen over the place these past 2 days," she writes. "It is not the quiet of peace, but of stillness. The hands go about their work, but their songs have ceased. In the evenings, when they gather, there is no sound from their quarters. Not a voice, not a drum. It is as if they are all holding their breath, waiting for a storm that will not break." Eleanor Croft's letters from the following week continue in this vein. She complains of sleepless nights, of a silence from the slave quarters so profound that it feels heavier than any noise. She writes of seeing the others move through the fields with their heads lowered, their eyes cast to the ground. She attributes it to a shared melancholy, a common grief for the man who was lost. But the official records do not support the idea of a beloved figure. The plantation's purchase manifest from the previous year shows the acquisition of 5 new hands from a trader in Savannah. Their names are not listed, only their ages and assessed values. The man who died was one of them, a stranger among people who had known each other for generations. His absence should not have created such a deep and lasting silence. The overseer's log details the practicalities of the burial. On October 15th, Silas Croft wrote, "Box made from scrap pine. Master Croft himself pointed to the spot for the grave. The lower field, near the cypress brake, said the ground there was good for little else. This too was unusual. The burial ground for the enslaved was a designated plot of land behind the main quarters, a place sanctified by tradition and generations of use. The lower field was fallow, its red clay soil considered too poor for cotton. To bury a man there, alone, was to set him apart even in death." For 2 weeks, the records of the Croft plantation returned to a state of normalcy. The ledger details bales of cotton sent to market. The overseer's log speaks of repairing a fence and purchasing new seed. Eleanor Croft's letters turn to matters of society in Charleston and the ordering of new fabrics. The strange stillness is not mentioned again. It seems the disruption, whatever its true nature, had passed. The man was buried, his value written off, his existence erased from the functional life of the plantation. The final mention of the matter is found back in the overseer's logbook. It is a single entry, dated October 28th, 14 days after the man's death. The entry is short, clearly written as an instruction received rather than an observation made. It reads, "Per order of Mr. E. Croft, the name of the deceased hand is struck from the roll." The physical artifact of the logbook shows this command was carried out with a strange emphasis. In the main ledger, the line for the man's name was simply left blank. But in the overseer's own private roster, a list he likely kept for his personal use, a name must have been written. We cannot know what it was. A thick, heavy line of black ink has been drawn over it, scoring the paper so deeply that it almost tore through. The name is entirely obliterated. The entry ends there. It is followed by a large, dark stain, an irregular circle of black ink, where the nib of the pen was left pressed to the paper. It soaked through the page, and the 2 pages beneath it, a permanent mark of hesitation, or something more. After that entry, Silas Croft's logbook is silent on the matter of the dead. It is as if the man had never been there at all. The inkblot is the only tombstone he was ever given. The silence on the Croft plantation did not break. It festered. By the first week of November, nearly a month after the burial, the stillness described by Eleanor Croft had curdled into something else. It was no longer an absence of sound, but a presence of quiet. The letters she sent to her sister during this period became infrequent and short, her elegant prose replaced with terse, anxious updates about the weather and household matters. The oppressive quiet of the slave quarters was no longer a subject she seemed willing to put to paper. The first outside account of this change comes from the journal of a traveling Methodist preacher, the Reverend Michael Finch. Finch's circuit brought him through St. Helena Parish twice a year. His diary, preserved by the church archives in Charleston, is a meticulous record of his spiritual duties. His entry, for November 8, 1847, describes his visit to the Croft plantation. He had been there before, and his previous entries spoke of a lively congregation, of powerful hymns sung in the praise house. This time, his observations were different. "A spirit of heaviness has taken root among the Croft Negroes," he wrote. "I preached from Isaiah of the burdens of the soul, but their eyes were vacant. They did not seem to hear the word. They moved as if in a dream, their bodies present, but their spirits elsewhere. I have seen grief, and I have seen hardship, but this was neither. This was an emptiness. I spoke with the overseer, a Mr. Silas Croft, who assured me all was well. Yet when I looked upon his flock, I saw a hallowed folk, their gazes fixed on the distant fields as if watching for a sign that would not come. I fear a shadow has fallen over this place that my words cannot pierce." The Reverend does not elaborate on what this shadow might be. His diary moves on to his next stop, another plantation miles downriver, where he notes with relief the sound of joyous singing. The official records of the Croft plantation for this period remain stubbornly mundane. The ledger notes the sale of 20 bales of cotton on November 12th. The overseer's log details the work of repairing the roof of the main barn after a storm. There is no mention of low morale or spiritual malaise. The daily accounting of labor continues without interruption. The number of working hands is stable. The machine of the plantation appears to be running as it always had. The first specific sighting is found in a source recorded many years later, long after the war and emancipation. It is a testimony, transcribed in 1889 by a student of folklore from a woman named Hattie, who had been enslaved on the Beaumont plantation, which bordered the Croft property to the south. Hattie was an old woman by then, her memory a fragile tapestry of hardship and survival. But her recollection of that autumn in 1847 was clear. "We heard things first," she stated in the transcript. "Heard a quiet fall over the Croft place. We shared a fence line, see? We used to hear their songs at night. Then nothing, just the cypress and the frogs. We thought it was trouble with the master, or sickness." She went on to describe seeing something herself one evening as she was bringing water from the well near the property line. The sun was going down, bleeding all over the sky. I saw a man standing at the edge of the Croft cotton field. He wasn't working, just standing there, still as a scarecrow. He was a big man, broad in the shoulder, the kind they buy for field clearing. The interviewer asked her what was strange about it. "Everything," she replied. "He was just stood there, didn't move a muscle." The other Croft folk were working the rows further in, and they kept their backs to him, all of them. It was like there was a wall around him nobody could cross. He faced the setting sun, but his head wasn't up. It was down like he was looking at the dirt under his feet. I saw him there 3 nights in a row, always the same spot. Then I didn't see him no more. The description Hattie gave of the man's physical build is consistent with the sparse details of the recent purchase, who had been recorded as dead and buried in the Croft ledger a month prior. There is, however, no record of any new slaves being purchased by Elias Croft during that time. The number of hands on his official roll remained unchanged, save for the 1 man who had been subtracted in October. The silence in the official Croft papers becomes, in this light, an act of deliberate omission. Something was happening in the fields, something witnessed by outsiders and felt by all who lived there, yet it left no mark on the pages of the ledger or the overseer's log. The narrative of the plantation continued as if the dead remained buried, as if the living were not haunted by what they saw. It is a history written not by what it says, but by what it refuses to see. This official silence is broken by a single, damaged document. It was discovered not in the main plantation records, but among a box of miscellaneous family papers sold at an estate auction in the early 20th century. It is a fragment of a personal letter, the paper brittle and yellowed with age. The handwriting matches that of the overseer, Silas Croft. The top of the page, which would have contained the date and recipient, is gone. Based on the content, it is believed to have been written to his brother, who managed a farm in Georgia. The remaining text is stark, stripped of the formalities of correspondence. The page is torn unevenly down the right side, cutting off some sentences mid-thought. The fragment reads, "Brother, I do not know what is to be done. The master insists we work him as any other, but he is not as any other. He does not tire, he does not sleep. When the others go to their quarters, he remains in the field, standing in the darkness. We find him there in the morning, in the exact same place. The others will not work near him. They empty the rows on either side, leaving him a wide berth." Yesterday, Sarah dropped her basket and ran from the field, wailing that his eyes... Here, the page is torn. The rest of the sentence is lost. The fragment continues on the next line, the handwriting more agitated, less controlled. "Work of 2 men, never stopping for water or rest. The master sees only the profit in it. He speaks of it as a marvel. I see it as an abomination. He was buried. I saw the grave filled myself. But he is here. He has the soil of that place still on his skin. It does not wash off. At night I feel his stillness, more than any sound. It is a cold that seeps into the house, into my very bones. I do not know what he is, but he is not the man we purchased. That man is in the ground. This one..." The letter ends there. The bottom half of the page has been ripped away, a violent straight tear that suggests it was done intentionally. What followed that final, desperate thought is lost to time. Another piece of a story consumed by the silence it describes. Elias Croft was, above all, a businessman. His plantation was not an ancestral home, but an investment, and he managed it with the cold pragmatism of a factory owner. His surviving correspondence from the autumn of 1847, housed in the Merchant Archives of Charleston, is focused almost entirely on accounts, crop prices, and shipping logistics. He was a man who saw the world through a ledger, and every soul on his property, including his own, was an asset or a liability. In mid-November, the subject of his letters to his cotton factor in Charleston, a Mr. Thomas Finch, begins to shift. Elias Croft, usually so direct in his dealings, becomes evasive. He makes no mention of a resurrected slave or a disruption among his workforce. Instead, he speaks of a peculiar financial dilemma. On November 18th, he wrote, "I find myself in possession of an asset of a most unusual nature. It is a piece of property whose value is difficult to assess by conventional metrics, yet its potential for labor is, I must confess, quite staggering. I am considering its liquidation, but the circumstances require a delicate and private transaction." Finch, a man accustomed to the straightforward trade of cotton and rice, seemed perplexed. His reply, dated November 21st, is brief. "Mr. Croft, I am a factor of goods, not of curiosities. If you have a hand to sell, I can find you a buyer. You need only provide the usual details: age, skills, temperament. I do not deal in riddles." Elias Croft's response, sent a few days later, is a masterpiece of calculated omission. He describes a man, but he does so in language more suited to describing a piece of machinery. The asset in question, he writes, is a male of approximately 30 years, strong of build, suitable for any manner of field labor. His temperament is compliant. He requires no supervision. His true value, however, lies in his resilience. He is impervious to exhaustion and resistant to the common ailments that so often diminish the value of prime hands. He will work from the first light of dawn to the last, and beyond, without complaint or pause. There is no mention of the man's death and burial. There is no mention of the fear he inspired in the other slaves, or the cold stillness that his overseer felt in his bones. Croft was not selling a man, he was selling a phenomenon. He was packaging an unnatural endurance as a premium feature, turning an object of terror into an article of commerce. The problem, as his letters reveal, was not a moral one, but a logistical one. The man was, in the eyes of the law and his own records, already dead. He had been written off the books. To sell him was to acknowledge his existence, an existence that defied all accounting. In early December, Croft's letters to his lawyer, a man named Julian Hayes, become more frequent. He writes of a clerical error that needs correcting, of a discrepancy in the property rolls that must be handled with the utmost discretion. "I have a hand," he wrote on December 5th, "who, due to an unfortunate misjudgment by my overseer, was prematurely recorded as a loss. The man has since made a full recovery. I wish to sell him, but I am uncertain of the legal standing. Can a man be sold whose death has already been entered into the record?" The lawyer's reply, if one was sent, has not been preserved. It seems likely the advice was not what Croft wished to hear. To admit the error would be to invite questions. How could a man be declared dead, buried, and then reappear, perfectly healthy? It was a story that would attract the wrong kind of attention. Invite whispers of mismanagement or, worse, something supernatural. Such rumors were bad for business. Croft's solution was to bypass the official channels. He would not correct the record. He would create a new one. He decided to sell the man not as a recovered asset from his own plantation, but as a new piece of property altogether, with no history and no name. He would absorb the initial loss recorded in his ledger and treat the sale as pure, untraceable profit. His correspondence with the factor, Thomas Finch, resumes with a newfound clarity. "Forget my previous inquiries," Croft wrote on December 10th. "I have a prime field hand for private sale. No papers, no history. He is to be sold as is. I am not looking for market price. I am looking for a quick, quiet transaction. The buyer must be a man who does not ask questions." It is in a final, hastily written postscript to one of these letters that Elias Croft allows a flicker of the truth to show through. It seems an unguarded thought, added after the letter was finished, the ink darker and the script less controlled. He writes of the man's physical appearance, a detail he had until then avoided. The postscript is a single sentence, a chilling fragment of the reality he was trying so hard to conceal. "He was buried in the lower field," it reads, "where the soil is red and poor. I believe he has brought some of it back with him." This description, of soil clinging to the skin, of an earthiness that could not be washed away, matches the overseer's private fears. It suggests that what Croft was selling was not just a man, but a piece of the ground he was buried in. He was not merely liquidating an asset. He was attempting to rid his property of an unnatural presence, to sell the ghost that walked his fields. And in the bustling, impersonal marketplace of Charleston, he believed he could find a buyer willing to purchase an enigma, so long as the price was right and the labor was guaranteed. The man had become a matter of account once more, his humanity erased, his impossible story rendered down to a simple calculation of profit and loss. The man was brought to Charleston in the third week of December, a time when the city's commerce was at its peak. Cotton and rice flowed out from the plantations, and the wealth they generated fueled a brisk trade in all manner of goods, including human lives. The city's auction blocks were busy. Elias Croft, seeking a discreet sale, avoided the larger, more public houses. Through his factor, Thomas Finch, he arranged for the man to be included in a smaller, private auction held in a warehouse near the wharves. These sales were known for handling specialized or problematic property, slaves with difficult histories, or those being sold to settle debts quietly. A notice for this auction appeared in the Charleston Courier on December 22, 1847. It was a small advertisement buried among shipping announcements and notices of estate sales. It announced the sale of valuable property, including household furnishings, livestock, and a small lot of uncommon hands suited for country work. Tucked at the end of this list was a final, curious entry. Also, one stout male, prime age, fit for field labor, impervious to ailment and of a tireless constitution, sold with no guarantee save for his strength. The language was unusual. Guarantees of health were standard. To advertise a man as impervious to ailment was a bold, almost unbelievable claim. A more vivid account of the sale comes from the diary of a visiting merchant from Boston, a Mr. Alistair Finch. There is no known relation to the factor, Thomas Finch. The merchant's diary is a dry, factual account of his business dealings, but his entry for December 23rd contains a rare moment of personal observation. He had attended the auction out of curiosity, having heard rumors of the uncommon hands being offered. The auction yard was a dismal place, Finch wrote, a brick-walled enclosure smelling of damp and tar. The lot of Negroes was brought out first. They were a sorry-looking group, mostly older men and women, their faces etched with despair. The bidding was slow. Then they brought out the last one. The auctioneer did not give him a name, only a number. He was a tall, powerfully built man, yet he moved with a strange, deliberate slowness, as if each step required a conscious thought. Finch's description becomes more detailed, his tone shifting from dispassionate observer to unsettled witness. A silence fell over the yard when he took the block. It was not his size that commanded it, but his aspect. His skin was of a dull, uniform color, like packed clay, and it seemed to absorb the light. His clothes, though coarse, were clean, yet he looked as if he had just been pulled from the earth. But it was his eyes that held the crowd. They were open, but they did not see. They were like panes of dull glass, fixed on some point beyond the wall, beyond the city itself. There was no fear in them, no anger, no life. There was only an unnerving vacancy. The auctioneer, according to Finch's account, kept his description brief, repeating the claims from the newspaper advertisement, tireless, impervious to sickness. He invited potential buyers to inspect the man. None moved, Finch wrote. The other slaves in the yard, who had been huddled together, now pressed themselves against the far wall, their faces turned away. They would not look at him. A planter next to me, a man of loud and coarse demeanor, fell silent. He muttered to his companion that the man had the grave dirt on him. I did not understand his meaning, but I felt a profound chill, despite the mildness of the day. The bidding, when it began, was hesitant. The man's powerful physique was undeniable, but his vacant expression and the palpable fear he inspired in the other slaves made buyers wary. The price stalled, well below what a man of his build should have fetched. It was then, Finch notes, that a single buyer stepped forward. He was a man I did not recognize, the diary reads. Dressed plainly, with a face that gave nothing away. He did not inspect the Negro on the block. He simply raised his hand and offered a price, a sum so low it was almost an insult. The auctioneer, eager to be done with the business, called for other bids. None came. The yard was as silent as a tomb. The man was sold to the stranger for a pittance. The legal document that finalized this transaction still exists. It is the bill of sale, filed in the Charleston County Archives. It is a standard form, its printed fields filled in with neat, cursive script. It records the date of sale, December 23, 1847. It lists the seller as Thomas Finch, acting as agent. It describes the property sold as one Negro male, approx. 30 years of age, 6 feet in height, stoutly built, no distinguishing marks or scars noted. The most crucial detail on this document is the name of the buyer. He is listed as Alistair Finch. It is the same name as the Boston merchant who recorded the scene in his diary, a coincidence that is both confusing and unsettling. The merchant's diary gives no indication that he made a purchase that day. On the contrary, he expresses a sense of dread regarding the man on the block. It is possible there were 2 men of the same name in Charleston that day, one a planter, the other a merchant. Or perhaps the record is in error. The buyer paid in cash, and his name appears only this once in the city's extensive auction records, a ghost in the archives as enigmatic as the man he purchased. The bill of sale is the only official record that attests to the man's second life. It is a legal affirmation of an impossible event. A man, officially deceased and buried, was sold again. His value, once written off as a total loss, was restored. His bondage, which should have ended with his death, was renewed. Death itself could not grant him his freedom. The final and most chilling detail of the bill of sale is a blank space. The form includes a line for the name of the slave being sold. On this document, that line is empty. The auctioneer had not given him a name, and the bill of sale did not grant him one. He was sold as a number, a description, a unit of labor. The name his mother gave him, the name Elias Croft had ordered struck from the roll, was now lost forever. He was a man without a past, a man who had died and been reborn into a legal and social void. His identity as erased as the dirt that was shoveled over his coffin. The document is a testament not just to a transaction, but to an erasure. Alistair Finch's rice plantation was situated in the marshy, fever-ridden lowlands south of Charleston, a region known for its punishing labor and profound isolation. Finch was not a member of the established planter aristocracy. His name does not appear in the social registers or agricultural societies of the time. He was a man who, like the property he had just purchased, seemed to have no history. Records show he acquired the land a mere 2 years prior, and its productivity was marginal at best. His was a desperate enterprise, carved out of swamp and cypress, worked by a small, unremarked-upon group of enslaved people. Records from the Finch estate are almost non-existent. No detailed ledgers like those kept by Elias Croft have survived. What little we know of this period comes from a handful of letters and a fragmented work journal kept by Finch himself. These documents, discovered in a mislabeled county tax file decades later, paint a picture of a place already teetering on the edge of failure, and of a master whose grip on his own affairs was becoming increasingly tenuous. The man purchased in Charleston arrived at the Finch plantation just before the new year. His arrival is not noted with any ceremony. There is no entry detailing the acquisition of a new hand. Instead, his presence is felt through the sudden change in the tone of Finch's own writings. In a letter to a supplier in Charleston, dated January of 1848, Finch complains of a disruption, not among his workforce, but in the atmosphere of the place itself. "A pervasive quiet has settled over my people," he wrote. "They have become sullen and uncommunicative, not only with me, but with one another. They perform their tasks with a mechanical slowness, their eyes always downcast. When the new hand is in the fields, they work at a great distance from him, as if he carries a contagion. They refuse to speak to him, or even to look in his direction. It is a foolish and costly superstition, and it is slowing our work to a crawl." Finch's descriptions of the man himself are detached, clinical, and tinged with a growing sense of disbelief. He refers to him not by a name, but as the Purchase or the Charleston Hand. His observations, recorded in his private work journal, focus on the man's impossible capacity for labor. He works from sunup to sundown without pause, reads an entry from early February. He does not stop for water, nor does he take a portion of the daily meal. I have never seen him eat or drink. He simply works. The others watch him. Their faces a mixture of fear and something I cannot name. They whisper among themselves when they think I am not listening. They speak of the soil he came from, of the red clay of St. Helena. This reference to a specific type of soil is significant. The lowlands where Finch's plantation was located were known for their rich, black, alluvial earth. The red clay of the upcountry was a different world. The other slaves, likely from the surrounding area, would have recognized it as foreign. That they could identify the soil of his origin suggests it was still visible on him, a permanent stain that marked him as an outsider, as something other. As the weeks passed, Finch's journal entries grew more erratic. The man's unnatural endurance, which at first seemed a remarkable asset, began to take on a more sinister quality. Finch noted that the tools the man used seemed to wear out at an accelerated rate, the wood of axe handles splintering, the iron of hoe blades wearing thin, as if the work he performed was draining the life from the objects themselves. A more disturbing observation appears in an entry from March. "The ground where he stands for too long becomes cold," Finch wrote. "This morning I went to the edge of the new field he has been clearing. He was at the far end, felling a cypress. The spot where he had clearly been standing for some time yesterday, by a pile of cleared brush, was barren. The grass was withered and gray, and the earth beneath was cold to the touch, as if the sun had not reached it. It was a perfect circle of dead earth. The other hands refused to walk there." Finch, a man who had purchased a slave advertised as impervious to ailment, was now confronted with a property that seemed to project its own form of blight. The quiet that had settled over his people was now matched by a creeping sterility in the land itself. His letters from this period cease to speak of profit and productivity, and instead are filled with complaints of failing equipment, unexplained crop rot in the storehouse, and a general sense of malaise that he could not identify. The isolation of the plantation seemed to amplify the strangeness. There were no neighbors for miles, no traveling preachers or merchants to witness what was unfolding. There was only the swamp, the small, terrified group of enslaved people, and the silent, tireless figure in the fields. The final entries in Alistair Finch's work journal from the last week of March 1848 are almost incoherent, the script devolving into a barely legible scrawl. He speaks of sleepless nights, of a silence that is no longer empty, but listening. The last entry is dated March 29th. It is short, and it is the only time Finch describes the man as doing anything other than working. He does not attribute any motive or emotion to the action, but his description is filled with a sense of profound dread. "He stands by the riverbank," Finch wrote. "He does not look at the water. He looks into it. The others say he is not looking, but waiting. The earth beneath his feet is black." This is the final sentence in the journal. The following pages have been removed. They were not torn out in haste. They were cut, carefully, with a sharp blade, excising whatever Alistair Finch wrote next. All that remains is the stub of the first cut page, a clean, straight line that marks the end of his testimony. A final, deliberate act of silence in a story defined by what is left unsaid. Records concerning Alistair Finch and his rice plantation cease after the winter of 1848. The property was found abandoned the following spring by a county tax assessor making his rounds. The assessor's report, filed in April of 1849, noted that the fields were fallow and overgrown. The main house was unlocked, and the slave cabins stood empty, their doors swinging in the breeze. There were no signs of violence or struggle. The place was simply deserted, as if its inhabitants had walked away in the middle of a day's work and never returned. The fate of Alistair Finch, and the small number of slaves registered to his name, was never determined. The property was eventually seized by the state for failure to pay taxes and sold off in parcels years later. Of the man sold twice, nothing more was ever written. No record of his existence after that final, chilling journal entry has ever been found. The only proof of his impossible story remains the bill of sale, filed away and forgotten in the Charleston County archives. It is a simple piece of paper, a routine artifact of commerce that documents an unnatural transaction. It lists his price, his physical attributes, and the name of the man who bought him. The space for his own name is, and has always been, blank.